Victoria Hale came back to consciousness with the violent certainty of pain. Something struck her jaw, sharp and numbing at once, and the sensation dragged her upward through darkness. Her eyes opened to blackness, broken by shifting reflections. For a moment, nothing made sense. Her body felt heavy, pinned in place, and an unnatural pressure wrapped around her legs. Then the cold arrived, not gradually but all at once, an invasive, biting force that stole her breath and set every nerve screaming. Water. Cold water surged around her calves, then her knees, flooding the footwell of her car. The interior lights flickered weakly, casting warped shadows across the dashboard. Victoria tried to inhale and choked instead, coughing as icy droplets splashed against her face. Her head throbbed. Her jaw ached as if she had been hit. Thoughts came in fragments, unconnected and useless. Why am I in the car? Why is it dark? Why is there water? The car tilted slightly, the angle wrong, unfamiliar. Through the windshield, she saw nothing but rippling blackness, broken by pale streaks of reflected light far above. The realization came slowly, resisted by shock, but it was unmistakable. The car was sinking. Her heart began to hammer, panic rising in her chest, but her mind lagged behind, sluggish and disoriented. She tried to move her legs and felt resistance, the water already pressing against her, stealing warmth, stealing strength. Her fingers fumbled uselessly at her seatbelt before instinct took over, and she forced herself to focus. Breathe. Think. The interior filled rapidly now, the water climbing past her thighs. It burned like ice, shocking her muscles into trembling. Her hands shook as she reached for the door handle. For one terrifying second, nothing happened. The pressure outside held the door fast, sealed by the river itself. A sharp, animal fear clawed at her chest. This is how I die. The thought cut through the fog with brutal clarity, and with it came a surge of raw survival instinct. Victoria braced herself, waited for the car to sink just a fraction more, and pulled again with everything she had left. The door gave way suddenly, swinging outward in a violent rush. Water exploded into the car, slamming into her torso, stealing what little air she had managed to draw. She was pulled toward the opening, scraped against metal, disoriented by the force of the current. The world turned sideways. Up and down lost meaning. All she knew was cold and motion and the desperate need to escape. She kicked free, pushing away from the car as she had once been taught in a swimming pool, long ago in warmth and safety. Her shoes tore loose. Her coat dragged at her shoulders. She clawed upward, arms burning, lungs screaming as she fought through the freezing river. Her head broke the surface with a gasp that was half a sob. Night air sliced into her lungs as she coughed violently, choking on water. The Hudson River stretched around her, dark and endless, the current pulling insistently at her body. Her muscles felt weak, clumsy, unresponsive. The cold was no longer just painful, it was numbing, creeping inward, dulling her thoughts, her reactions. She tried to orient herself, spinning slowly in the water. Somewhere nearby, the bridge loomed overhead, its lights glowing like distant stars. The shore was invisible, indistinguishable from the darkness. And then she heard it, laughter. At first, she thought it was imagined, a cruel hallucination born of shock. The sound floated down from above, carried clearly across the water, light, careless, unmistakably human. Victoria froze, treading water with slow, inefficient movements, straining to listen. A man's voice followed, low and familiar, speaking in a tone she had known for years. Her heart stuttered. No, that's not possible. She turned her head toward the bridge, squinting against the darkness. The voices continued, joined by another, higher, feminine. Amused. They sounded close together, intimate, relaxed. Recognition hit her with the force of a physical blow. That voice belonged to Charles, her husband's laughter. The same sound she had heard across dinner tables and quiet evenings, drifted down to her now, unchanged and unmistakable. And beside him, another woman laughed softly, responding to him with a familiarity that left no room for doubt. Victoria's arms faltered. Her body dipped beneath the surface for a second before she forced herself back up, coughing again. Her mind raced, piecing together fragments she did not want to understand. Charles was not calling for help. He was not shouting her name. He was standing on the bridge, laughing. The river carried her slowly, relentlessly, and with every second the truth sharpened, cutting through the haze of shock and pain. The dinner, the wine, the sudden dizziness, the way her body had betrayed her, collapsing into darkness before she could even ask what was wrong. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a mistake. As the cold tightened its grip and her strength continued to drain away, the final realization settled over her with devastating clarity. The man she had trusted with her life had tried to end it. He had watched her car sink. He had listened to the river swallow her. And he had walked away, believing she was already dead. Charles Hale stood at the edge of the bridge railing, his hands resting on the cold metal as he stared down into the black water below. The headlights of Victoria's car had vanished seconds ago. There was nothing left to see now but faint ripples spreading across the surface of the Hudson River, quickly erased by the current. The river looked calm again, indifferent, as if nothing unusual had happened at all. Beside him, Lauren Price exhaled sharply, her body finally releasing the tension it had been holding. She wrapped her arms around herself, not from the cold, but from the delayed shock of what they had just done. "It's over," she said quietly, as if saying it too loudly might somehow undo it. "You saw it go down. There's no way she got out." Charles didn't answer right away. His jaw was tight, his gaze fixed on the water. Somewhere deep inside him, a flicker of unease tried to surface, but he crushed it quickly. Doubt was dangerous now. Doubt led to mistakes. "The current's strong here," he said at last, his voice steady, practiced. Even if she woke up, which she didn't, she wouldn't last more than a few minutes. "The water's freezing." Lauren nodded, eager for reassurance. "People don't survive that. Not at night. Not in winter." Charles let out a short, humorless laugh. She never even had a chance. Lauren turned to look at him then, her eyes searching his face. "You're sure she didn't feel anything? That she didn't wake up before it happened?" He hesitated for a fraction of a second, then shook his head. "No, I made sure of that." The words came easily now, smoother each time he repeated them in his mind. "I crushed the pills completely, mixed them into the wine myself." She barely finished the glass before she started feeling dizzy. Lauren swallowed. "You told her it was a reconciliation dinner." "And she believed me," Charles said. There was a trace of bitterness in his voice, not regret. "She wanted to believe me. That made it easier." Lauren stepped closer, lowering her voice. "If she'd gone through with the divorce, you would have lost everything." Charles finally turned away from the river, meeting her gaze. "Exactly. Half the assets. Control of the company, the house. Years of work handed over because she decided she was done with me." His expression hardened. "I wasn't going to let that happen." Lauren's lips pressed into a thin line. "And if she'd exposed us, she would have destroyed both of us," Charles said flatly. This was the only way. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The night air felt heavy, pressing in around them. Then Lauren reached out and touched his arm, her fingers trembling slightly. "She's gone now," she said. "It's finished." Charles glanced back at the river one last time. In his mind, the image was already complete. Victoria trapped, helpless, disappearing into darkness. He pictured the police reports, the search efforts, the sympathetic looks. He knew the role he would play. He had rehearsed it. "She won't be found," he said. "Not here." The current will carry the car farther downriver. By the time they pull it out, if they ever do, there won't be anything left. Lauren's breathing slowed. So, what happens next? Charles straightened, smoothing his coat as if preparing for a meeting. Next we go home. Tomorrow I report her missing. I act concerned, devastated. He paused, and eventually, life moves on. Lauren allowed herself a small, nervous smile. Together. Yes, Charles said. Together. They turned away from the railing and began walking back toward their car, their footsteps unhurried, measured. From the bridge, the river looked empty again, silent beneath the night sky. Below them, unseen, Victoria drifted. Her movements had grown slower, weaker, the cold seeping deeper into her body with every passing second. Her arms felt heavy, unresponsive, as if they no longer fully belonged to her. Each breath took effort, and even that effort was beginning to feel pointless. The laughter from above had faded, leaving only the sound of water moving around her. The current pulled at her gently but insistently, carrying her farther from the bridge, farther from the place where everything had ended. Her thoughts blurred, the edges of her awareness softening. Panic gave way to exhaustion. Fighting no longer felt possible. As Charles and Lauren drove away, already imagining a future freed from consequences, Victoria's body surrendered to the river, her strength slipping away as darkness closed in once more. The river released Victoria without ceremony. She drifted into the shallows of a deserted industrial stretch along the Hudson, where rusted fencing leaned toward the water and long-abandoned warehouses cast broken reflections across the surface. The current slowed near the bank, pushing her body onto wet sand and debris. Her limbs lay twisted at an unnatural angle, soaked clothing clinging to her skin, her hair plastered across her face. In the darkness, she looked less like a person than something the river had decided to discard. Noah Bennett noticed her by accident. He had been walking along the shoreline, hands shoved into the pockets of his worn jacket, eyes scanning the ground for anything useful. Scrap bottles, something he could trade or sell. He almost passed her without stopping. From a distance, she was just another shape near the water, another piece of trash caught where it didn't belong. He slowed, then stopped. Something about the way she lay there made his stomach tighten. He stepped closer, careful with his footing, and crouched beside her. Her face was pale, lips tinged faintly blue. Her chest did not rise. For a long moment, Noah simply stared at her. "She's gone," he muttered to himself. It wouldn't have been the first body he'd seen by the river. It wouldn't even have been the worst. He stood, already turning away. Getting involved never led to anything good. People like him didn't call the police. They didn't explain things. They disappeared and kept moving. Then he saw it. A barely perceptible movement beneath her coat. A shallow, uneven rise, followed by a pause that seemed too long, then another. So faint it could have been imagined, but it wasn't. Noah froze. He knelt again, closer this time, pressing 2 fingers lightly against the side of her neck. He waited, counting silently. Just as he was about to pull his hand away, he felt it, a weak, fluttering pulse. "Damn it," he whispered. He looked around, instinctively checking the empty shoreline, the dark buildings looming nearby. No cars, no people, just the river and the cold and the sound of his own breathing. There was no time to think it through. Noah slipped one arm under her shoulders and the other beneath her knees. She was heavier than she looked, her body limp and unresponsive, but adrenaline carried him forward. He staggered up the embankment, boots slipping on wet ground, and headed toward the makeshift shelter he shared with 2 other men. A small, half-collapsed structure hidden behind an abandoned warehouse. By the time he reached it, his arms were burning and his breath came in ragged bursts. "What the hell is that?" one of the men demanded as Noah pushed through the doorway. Philip, broad and perpetually irritated, sat up from his spot near the heater. Yuri, older and leaner, squinted at the shape in Noah's arms. "Someone from the river," Noah said, lowering Victoria carefully onto his thin mattress. "She's alive." Philip snorted. "She looks dead to me." "She's breathing," Noah snapped. "Barely." Yuri leaned closer, eyes narrowing as he took in the expensive fabric of her coat, the delicate chain at her neck, the rings still clinging to her fingers. "You sure you want trouble like this? You know what happens if someone finds her here." Philip followed his gaze, interest sharpening. "Look at her jewelry. That alone could get us through the winter." "No," Noah said immediately, stepping between them and the bed. "You're not touching her." Philip scoffed. "Don't be stupid. If she dies here, we're finished. And if she lives, she won't thank you. People like her never do." Noah didn't move. "I'm not letting you rob her. And I'm not leaving her out there to freeze." Yuri shook his head slowly. "You always were soft." "Call it what you want," Noah said. His voice trembled, but he held his ground. "We warm her up. We wait. That's it." Reluctantly, they backed off, muttering under their breath. Noah worked quickly, peeling away Victoria's soaked coat and wrapping her in dry layers from his own meager belongings. He rubbed her arms, her hands, trying to coax warmth back into her skin. Her breathing remained shallow, uneven, each breath a fragile victory. Hours passed. The heater hummed weakly. Outside, the wind rattled loose metal. Victoria did not wake, but she did not stop breathing either. Her body hovered in a fragile balance, suspended between the river that had nearly claimed her and the world that had not yet taken her back. Noah sat beside her, watching her chest rise and fall, counting breaths as if his attention alone might keep her alive. He didn't know her name. He didn't know where she had come from or why she had ended up in the river. He only knew that, for now, she was still here. And that was enough. Time lost its meaning. Victoria existed in fragments, sensations without order, moments that surfaced and vanished before she could grasp them. Sometimes there was cold, deep and aching, lodged in her bones. Other times there was warmth pressed against her skin, rough fabric tucked around her shoulders. Sounds drifted in and out, the low hum of something mechanical, the distant clatter of metal, a man's voice speaking softly, usually to himself. She did not wake so much as surface. Her eyes would flutter open to darkness and unfamiliar shapes, then close again as exhaustion dragged her under. Her thoughts were slow, disconnected. She knew only that moving hurt, that breathing required effort, and that she was unbearably tired. The hypothermia left its mark. Her limbs felt heavy and unreliable, as if they belonged to someone else. When she tried to lift her hand, it trembled and fell back uselessly. Her mouth was dry, her throat raw, and her head throbbed with a dull, persistent ache. Memories hovered just beyond reach, blurred and incomplete. Noah stayed close. He moved quietly, aware of the tension his decision had created. Philip and Yuri watched with thinly veiled resentment, their patience worn down by the days that followed. They complained about the space she occupied, about the risk, about the wasted time. Noah ignored them as best he could. He checked her breathing constantly, counting each shallow rise of her chest. He brought her water in small sips when she could manage it, holding the cup steady with careful hands. He spoke to her sometimes, not because he expected answers, but because silence felt wrong. "You're safe," he murmured once, unsure if she could hear him. "You just need to rest." Victoria heard the voice before she understood the words. It anchored her, a steady presence cutting through the fog. When she opened her eyes again, the darkness resolved into shapes, a low ceiling, uneven walls, the dim glow of a single light source. This was not a hospital. There were no monitors, no antiseptic smell, no crisp sheets. Panic flickered weakly in her chest. She tried to sit up and failed, a sharp wave of dizziness forcing her back down. A hand appeared immediately, firm but gentle, pressing lightly against her shoulder. "Easy," the man said. "Don't try to move yet." She turned her head toward the sound. The effort left her breathless. The man came into focus slowly. Young, tired eyes, stubble along his jaw, concern etched into his expression. "Where?" Her voice came out hoarse, barely more than a whisper. "You're by the river," he said. "I found you on the bank." Her brow furrowed as she tried to process the words. The river. That part made sense in a distant way, like a memory glimpsed through frosted glass. She closed her eyes, searching for clarity, but the images slipped away again. "I wasn't rescued?" she asked, fear threading through her voice. He shook his head. "No, not officially." The answer frightened her more than she expected. Her fingers curled weakly into the blanket around her, her heart beginning to race. "You washed ashore," he continued quickly, reading the tension in her face. "I didn't know who to call. I didn't even know your name. I couldn't leave you there." She studied him. What little strength she had focused on his face. There was no calculation in his expression, no hint of threat, just exhaustion and something that looked like relief. "You can trust me," he added, quietly. "I won't hurt you." Trust felt like too much to offer, but fear required energy she didn't have. An instinct told her something else, just as clearly as it had told her to fight the river. He was safe. She let her head sink back against the thin pillow, her breathing slowing. The world narrowed again, but this time it didn't disappear entirely. She drifted, hovering near consciousness, aware now of the space around her and the man who remained at her side. Over the next day, her condition stabilized. The violent shivering subsided. The numbness eased into a deep, bone-weary ache. She slept for long stretches, waking briefly to drink water or answer simple questions. Her memory returned in pieces, her name. Flashes of her life, the weight of something terrible that waited just out of sight. No one ever pressed her. He kept his questions minimal, his presence consistent. When she was awake, he sat nearby. When she slept, he listened. On the third day, she was able to speak more clearly. "My name is Victoria," she said, the words grounding her. Noah nodded. "I'm Noah." She looked at him, really looked this time, committing his face to memory. "Thank you," she said quietly. He shrugged, uncomfortable with gratitude. "You're still here. That's what matters." For the first time since the river, Victoria believed she might survive. The memory returned all at once. Victoria woke with a sharp intake of breath, her heart racing as if she had been dropped back into the river without warning. For a moment she lay still, staring at the dim ceiling above her, her body rigid with tension. Then the images flooded in, no longer fragmented or distant, but brutally clear. The dinner table, candlelight reflected in crystal glasses. Charles sitting across from her, his voice gentle, his expression carefully composed. He had suggested the evening with a familiarity that now felt rehearsed. A reconciliation dinner. She remembered hesitating. Remembered telling him she didn't believe things could be fixed so easily. Remembered the wine, how rich it tasted, how she had barely finished the glass before a strange heaviness settled into her limbs. The sudden dizziness, the way the room had begun to tilt. Her thoughts slipping away from her even as she tried to speak. And then nothing. Victoria closed her eyes, her chest tightening as the truth locked into place with devastating certainty. Charles had tried to kill her. The realization did not come with hysteria or screaming panic. It arrived cold and precise like a verdict. Everything that followed, the river, the darkness, the laughter from the bridge, aligned perfectly with that single, unbearable fact. She turned her head slowly, the motion still costing her effort. Noah sat nearby, watching her closely. He had learned to read the subtle changes in her expression, the moment when confusion gave way to something sharper. "You remember," he said quietly. She nodded. Her throat felt tight, but her voice was steady when she spoke. "Everything." He didn't ask questions. He waited. "My husband," she said after a moment. "He drugged me. The dinner wasn't real. It was a setup." Noah's jaw tightened. "You're sure?" "Yes." Her fingers curled against the blanket. "He wanted me gone. A divorce would have cost him too much." Silence settled between them, heavy but not awkward. Noah leaned back slightly, absorbing the weight of what she had said. "Do you want to call the police?" he asked. The question lingered in the air. Victoria considered it carefully. Logic told her it was the obvious choice, the right one. But instinct, the same instinct that had driven her to fight the river, warned her against it. "Not yet," she said finally. Noah didn't argue. "Why?" She turned her gaze away, toward the shadowed wall. "If I call now, he controls the narrative. He's already playing the grieving husband. He has money, lawyers, influence. And I have nothing but a story and a body that nearly froze to death." Noah nodded slowly. "So what do you want to do?" "I need time," she said. "And I need to disappear." He thought for a moment, then stood. "I can help you get out of here." Quietly. Later that night, when she was strong enough to walk with support, they left the shelter together. The air outside was sharp, biting, but it felt cleaner than the stale darkness she was leaving behind. Victoria wore borrowed clothes, her own dried and folded in a small bag. Her movements were slow, deliberate, but each step felt like a reclaiming. They walked until they reached a gas station on the edge of the main road. Bright, fluorescent lights cut through the night, harsh and ordinary. Cars came and went without noticing her. For the first time since the river, she felt the world moving around her again. Noah handed her a phone. "You can use this. I'll wait outside." She nodded, gripping it tightly. Her fingers trembled as she dialed a number she hadn't used in years. The man who answered recognized her voice immediately. "Victoria," he said, stunned. "We thought—" "I know," she interrupted gently. "I don't have much time. I need help. And I need discretion." She explained only what was necessary, that her life had been threatened, that she was alive, but could not be publicly so, that she needed transportation, a place to stay and silence. The connection to her late father was enough. Trust was already there. When she hung up, her hands were steady again. "They'll send a car," she told Noah. "It'll take a little while." He nodded. "Good." As they waited, Victoria looked at him, really looked at him, as she had days before when fear still ruled her thoughts. "You didn't have to do any of this," she said. "You could have walked away." "So could you," he replied. "But you didn't." The car arrived quietly, pulling in beside the station without fanfare. Before getting in, Victoria turned back to Noah. "I can't promise anything," she said. "I don't even know what happens next." He met her gaze. "I'm not asking for promises." She hesitated, then reached out, her hand brushing his arm. A simple gesture, weighted with gratitude. "I won't forget you." He watched as she got into the car and drove away, her figure disappearing into the night. Victoria Hale was alive, but for now the world would continue to believe she was dead. Charles Hale waited exactly 24 hours before contacting the police. By then, he had rehearsed the story so many times that it felt almost real. He sat in the precinct interview room with his shoulders slumped, his hands clasped tightly together, his eyes rimmed with red from a night he claimed to have spent searching. His voice broke at the right moments. His pauses were convincing. Grief, when performed well, required restraint. "My wife didn't come home," he said, staring at the table as if the words themselves were too heavy to lift. She said she had a late meeting near the river. "She never does that without telling me where she's going, who she's meeting. This isn't like her." The officers exchanged glances, noting the tremor in his voice, the way he rubbed his hands together as if trying to warm them. "Did you argue that day?" one of them asked. Charles shook his head immediately. "No, we were trying to fix things." The lie slid into place without resistance. Search efforts began quickly. Patrol units canvassed the riverfront. By the second day, divers were called in after a fisherman reported something metallic beneath the surface. The recovery took hours. When the car finally emerged from the Hudson River, mud-streaked and distorted by water pressure, the crowd that had gathered fell silent. It was unmistakably Victoria's vehicle. Charles stood behind the police tape, his face pale, his hand pressed to his mouth as if he were struggling to breathe. Cameras captured the moment he turned away, shoulders shaking. The image would be replayed later on local news, accompanied by sympathetic commentary. There was no body inside, an officer said quietly. Charles closed his eyes, nodding as if the words confirmed his worst fear rather than disrupted his certainty. "The current," he murmured. "She must have been swept away." That explanation was accepted without argument. The Hudson was unforgiving. Everyone knew that. Within days, Charles became the object of public sympathy. Friends, colleagues, even distant acquaintances reached out with condolences. His phone filled with messages of support. At work, people spoke to him in hushed voices. No one questioned his grief. No one imagined that beneath the carefully curated sorrow, something else was taking root. Lauren Price moved into Victoria's house before the search officially ended. At first, Charles told himself it was temporary, practical. He needed someone there, someone who understood. Lauren told herself the same thing. But within a week, her clothes occupied a full closet. Her toiletries lined the bathroom counters. Her presence woven seamlessly into the routines of the home. They dined out again. Expensive restaurants, private rooms, champagne that Charles ordered without hesitation, paid for with accounts that still bore Victoria's name. "She would have wanted you to live," Lauren said one evening, her hand resting on his. "She wouldn't want you to suffer." Charles nodded, letting the justification settle comfortably around him. He resumed spending as if nothing had changed. New furniture, a short trip out of town, small luxuries that reminded him of control of normalcy. But Lauren's patience thinned quickly. "How long do we have to wait?" she asked one night, pacing the living room. "Everyone knows she's gone. The car was in the river. The house is ours now, in everything but name." Charles leaned back in his chair, irritation flickering across his face. "Legally, it's not that simple." "Then make it simple," she snapped. "Talk to a lawyer. Push for a declaration." "There are procedures," he said sharply. "Timelines." Lauren crossed her arms. "I'm not waiting 5 years to be a secret." Her words struck something raw. Charles had expected gratitude, compliance. Instead, pressure mounted from every direction. He assured her he was handling it, that things would fall into place. He believed it until the call came. The lawyer's voice was calm, professional, discreet. "There's something you should know," he said. "I'm not at liberty to disclose details publicly yet, but given your position, it would be irresponsible not to inform you." Charles straightened in his chair. "Inform me of what?" "Victoria Hale's estate plan." Charles exhaled, tension easing. "Yes, I assumed she did not leave her assets to you," the lawyer interrupted gently. The silence that followed was absolute. "What?" Charles said. "The will was revised several months ago," the lawyer continued. "The majority of her estate is designated elsewhere, charitable trusts, business partners, foundations connected to her family." "That's impossible," Charles snapped. "I'm her husband." "You are," the lawyer agreed. "That does not automatically override a valid will." Charles stood abruptly, his chair scraping across the floor. "She would never do that." "She did," the lawyer said. and it was properly executed. The call ended shortly after, but Charles remained frozen, phone still pressed to his ear. The house felt suddenly unfamiliar, the walls too close, the silence oppressive. When Lauren returned home and saw his expression, she stopped short. What happened? He looked at her, disbelief giving way to rage. She cut me out. Lauren stared. Out of what? Everything. The word echoed between them. Confidence drained from Charles's posture, replaced by something brittle and volatile. For the first time since the bridge, the future he had imagined cracked visibly down the center. Victoria was gone, but she was still winning. Victoria Hale ceased to exist quietly. Under a different name, she checked into a modest hotel several miles from the river, far enough from the center of town that no one expected to see her there. The room was small and impersonal, neutral walls, thin curtains, furniture chosen for function rather than comfort. It suited her purpose. She needed a place where no one would remember her face, where her presence would not be questioned. She changed the way she looked first. Her hair, once styled carefully and instantly recognizable, was cut shorter and dyed darker. She wore large sunglasses when she went out, even on cloudy days, and clothes that blended into the background. Nothing tailored, nothing that suggested wealth. Makeup, when she used it at all, softened her features rather than sharpening them. The woman in the mirror no longer resembled the public figure whose photo still appeared on news segments about a missing business executive. She avoided everyone from her former life. No friends, no colleagues, no familiar places. Every errand was planned, every movement deliberate. She paid in cash when possible. She used a prepaid phone. The discipline came easily, fueled by the knowledge that one mistake could expose her too soon. From a distance, she watched. Charles and Lauren did not hide their lives. They didn't feel the need to. Restaurants, clubs, weekend trips. Victoria tracked them all, quietly noting dates, locations, expenses. She kept records the way she always had in business, methodical and unemotional. Credit card charges, property maintenance requests, vehicle usage, patterns. Lauren had fully assumed the role of mistress turned partner. She hosted dinners in Victoria's home, rearranged rooms, replaced items that had once belonged to someone else. Charles followed along, indulging every change as if erasing the past could make it irrelevant. Victoria observed without interference. Through her attorney, she confirmed what Charles had been told and more. Her estate plan was intact. The trusts were secure. Her business interests were protected by contingency clauses that activated the moment she was declared missing. Charles had no authority over her assets. He could spend what was already accessible, but nothing more. The reassurance brought clarity, not comfort. While Victoria remained hidden, Charles began to unravel. At first, it was subtle. A glance over his shoulder in a crowded restaurant. A pause in conversation when someone laughed too loudly nearby. He checked his mirrors while driving, his hands tightening on the steering wheel at imagined movements behind him. Lauren noticed the change before he admitted it. "You're distracted," she said one night, watching him pace the living room. "You've been like this for days." "I'm fine," Charles snapped. She raised an eyebrow. "You sure about that?" "Because you keep acting like someone's following you." The words struck a nerve. Charles stopped abruptly, his eyes narrowing. "Do you think that's funny?" "I think you're paranoid," Lauren said. "She's dead." But the certainty no longer came easily. Charles replayed the night at the bridge in his mind, searching for cracks. Had he waited long enough? Had he looked closely enough at the water? The image of the car sinking replayed endlessly, no longer comforting but unsettling. When the police hadn't found a body, he had dismissed it as luck. Now it felt like an unanswered question. He started checking locks obsessively. He stopped sleeping through the night. His spending grew erratic, alternating between restraint and reckless indulgence. Control once effortless, slipped through his fingers. Victoria noticed everything. She remained patient, allowing the pressure to build naturally. Fear, she knew, was most effective when it came from within. She did not confront him. She did not reveal herself. She allowed him to imagine threats that did not yet exist. Still, she prepared. Her attorney advised caution, timing, evidence. Victoria agreed. Truth meant nothing without proof, and proof required discipline. She gathered what she could, carefully, without crossing lines that might expose her presence. Each day brought her closer to the moment she would step back into the light. At night, alone in the hotel room, the weight of secrecy pressed down on her. She replayed Noah's face in her mind, the calm certainty in his voice when he had told her she was safe. She had not contacted him. Not yet. Some connections were too dangerous to revisit before the time was right. Victoria knew one thing with absolute clarity. She would not stay hidden forever, but when she returned, it would be on her terms. Charles Hale returned to the river as if drawn by a force he no longer controlled. He told Lauren he needed air, space to think, but the truth was simpler and darker. The Hudson River had become the center of his unease, the place where certainty had dissolved into doubt. He drove north along the familiar roads, past the industrial outskirts where the river bent away from the city, slowing near stretches of abandoned land and scattered shelters. He parked near the embankment and walked on foot, his coat pulled tight against the cold. He watched the water for a long time. Searching for answers it refused to give him. Then he turned his attention to the people who lived along its edges. He started carefully, a few casual questions, a sympathetic tone. A folded bill passed discreetly from one hand to another. He asked if anyone had seen a woman pulled from the river weeks earlier, if anyone had found a body, if anyone remembered something out of the ordinary. At first, the answers were vague. Shrugs, denials, disinterest. Then someone talked. She wasn't dead, a man muttered, eyes fixed on the cash, barely breathing but alive. Charles felt the words land like a blow to the chest. What happened to her? Another pause, another bill exchanged. Some guy found her, took her away, don't know where. A man. Charles's mind raced. Victoria had survived. She had been pulled from the river by someone he didn't know, someone who had seen her alive, who might have heard her story. The realization shattered the fragile calm he had been clinging to. She left, the man added. Didn't stick around. Charles thanked them and walked away before they could see the fury hardening behind his eyes. Back in his car, his hands shook as he gripped the steering wheel. Fear gave way to rage, then to resolve. If Victoria was alive, everything was at risk. The will, the exposure, prison. He could not allow that. The plan formed quickly, brutally. He would finish what he had started. He would draw her out, somewhere quiet, somewhere final, somewhere no one would interfere. A cemetery. It was perfect. Secluded, public enough to seem harmless, private enough to disappear within. He knew the one he would use. A small burial ground near the river, rarely visited except during daylight hours. All he needed was to make Victoria believe she was safe enough to meet him. While Charles prepared, the danger reached Noah Bennett by chance. He had been near the same stretch of river, helping one of the men he still knew from the shelter. Snatches of conversation drifted toward him, fragments that made his attention sharpen. A well-dressed man asking questions, offering money, talking about a woman who had survived the river. Noah listened without drawing attention to himself. When he heard enough, his blood ran cold. She left with a man, someone said. Noah understood immediately. Victoria, the memory of her pale face, her shallow breathing, the way she had trusted him enough to leave, that trust tightened painfully in his chest. If Charles was looking for her, then whatever had happened the first time wasn't over. Noah didn't hesitate. He went straight to the police station, stepping inside with hands shoved deep into his pockets, bracing himself for disbelief. He expected to be dismissed, ignored, laughed out of the room. Instead, one officer listened. "What's her name?" the officer asked. "Victoria Hale," Noah said. The reaction was immediate. He told them everything. How he had found her by the river, how she had nearly died, what she had told him about her husband. The details poured out of him, raw and unpolished but consistent. As he spoke, the atmosphere in the room shifted. This was no longer a missing person case. It was attempted murder. Within hours, police began tracing Charles's movements. Credit card activity, vehicle location data, recent inquiries near the river. The pieces aligned quickly, forming a pattern that pointed toward a deliberate return to the scene of the crime. They found him at the cemetery just after dusk. Charles was walking between rows of headstones, his phone in his hand, when the patrol cars pulled in behind him, lights flashing silently. He turned, confusion flashing across his face, followed by recognition. He tried to run. They took him to the ground within seconds. At the station, the pressure mounted fast. Evidence, witness statements, Noah's testimony, the timeline. The inconsistencies in Charles's story collapsed under scrutiny. He denied everything at first. Then he deflected. Then he blamed stress, fear, grief. Finally, the truth spilled out. "Yes," he snapped, his composure finally gone. "I did it. I had to. She was going to ruin me." The words hung in the air, irreversible. "And Lauren?" an investigator asked quietly. Charles hesitated, then laughed bitterly. "She knew. She was there. She pushed me." By the time the confession ended, there was nothing left to salvage. Charles Hale had walked into the cemetery believing he could erase his mistake. Instead, he had led the police straight to the truth. The aftermath unfolded without drama, but with relentless weight. Charles Hale was formally charged within days. Attempted murder, conspiracy, evidence tampering. Each count was read aloud in a courtroom stripped of spectacle. He sat behind the defense table in a tailored suit that no longer fit the man he had become. His expression rigid, eyes hollow. There were no outbursts, no declarations of innocence. Detention followed swiftly. Bail was denied. The image of the grieving husband collapsed entirely, replaced by the quiet finality of a man who had been caught. Lauren Price did not stand beside him. Her pregnancy altered the immediate course of events. Prosecutors acknowledged her role publicly, her presence on the bridge, her knowledge of the plan, her silence afterward, but deferred arrest pending medical evaluations. The decision drew criticism and scrutiny. News outlets seized on the contradiction. A woman implicated in an attempted murder, temporarily shielded by the life she carried. Public opinion turned quickly and without mercy. Lauren retreated from view, her name circulating endlessly across screens and headlines. The life she had imagined, marriage, status, security, disintegrated under the glare of exposure. She was admitted to the hospital late in her pregnancy, complications escalating faster than expected. The stress, the isolation, the weight of what she had done pressed down on her relentlessly. She died during childbirth. The twins survived. The news reached Victoria quietly, delivered by her attorney in a measured tone that did not soften the reality. Victoria listened without interruption, her hands folded in her lap, her expression unreadable. When the call ended, she remained still for a long time, absorbing the finality of it. Lauren was gone. Charles was facing the full force of the law, and 2 newborn children had entered the world without parents. Victoria visited the hospital once alone. She stood outside the neonatal unit, watching through the glass as the infants slept beneath soft lights, unaware of the circumstances that had shaped their first breath. They were small, fragile, impossibly innocent. Whatever their parents had done belonged to another story entirely. The decision came without hesitation. Victoria took responsibility for them. There were legal steps. Of course, guardianship filings, court approvals, careful negotiations handled quietly through counsel. But the choice itself was simple. She would not allow the children to become collateral damage. She would not let their lives begin in punishment for crimes they had not committed. When the twins came home, the house felt different. Not lighter, not healed, but grounded in something real. The cries at night, the routines, the small, relentless demands of care pulled Victoria firmly into the present. Grief did not disappear, but it changed shape, tempered by purpose. Noah Bennett entered her life openly then, without secrecy or shadows. There was no dramatic reunion, no declarations. He came quietly at her invitation, stepping into a world that had once been closed to him. He met the twins. He learned their schedules. He listened more than he spoke. Their connection deepened naturally, built on what they had already shared. There was no illusion between them, no debt or imbalance. He had saved her life, but he did not own that act, and she did not define herself by it. They spoke honestly, sometimes painfully so, about fear, about guilt, about the weight of survival. Trust replaced urgency. He did not rush her. She did not hide from him. In the evenings, after the house had quieted, they sat together without pretense. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they didn't. The bond between them grew not from rescue, but from choice, from the steady recognition of each other as equals who had endured something that could not be undone. Victoria knew the road ahead would not be simple. Court dates remained. Public memory lingered. Healing did not follow a schedule. But for the first time since the river, she no longer felt alone in carrying it all. And that, she realized, mattered more than anything else. A year passed without announcement. Life did not reset itself, but it settled into something honest. Victoria and Noah moved forward deliberately, without the urgency that had once defined everything around her. There was no dramatic reinvention, no attempt to erase the past. They built a life that acknowledged what had happened without allowing it to dominate what came next. Noah found steady work within Victoria's company, not as a favor and not as a symbol. His education, interrupted years earlier, proved solid. He learned quickly, worked quietly, and earned the respect of people who never knew how their paths had first crossed. To those around them, he was simply a capable employee who kept his head down and did his job well. At home, they lived as equals. Victoria confronted her trauma without performance. Therapy was private. Recovery was uneven. Some nights were calm, others restless. There were moments when the sound of running water tightened her chest, when bridges still demanded deliberate breathing. She did not dramatize these moments, and Noah did not try to fix them. He stayed present. That was enough. The twins grew quickly, filling the house with noise and ordinary chaos. Their presence anchored everything. Victoria watched them learn to sit, then crawl, then laugh, and felt the strange clarity that came with responsibility freely chosen. They were not reminders of loss, but proof that innocence could survive even the worst circumstances. The legal process ended quietly. Charles Hale was convicted and sentenced. The details were documented, archived, and eventually forgotten by the public. No interviews followed. No statements were issued. Victoria did not attend the final hearing. By then, the outcome no longer defined her. The past was sealed, not erased, but contained. On a clear morning the following spring, Victoria and Noah were married. There was no press, no announcements, no grand venue. The ceremony took place in a small garden outside the city, attended only by those who truly mattered. The twins toddled between the chairs, unaware of the significance of the moment. Vows were spoken softly, without embellishment. What bound them was not rescue or debt, but recognition. They had survived separately, then together. They had chosen each other not in desperation, but in clarity. Their life was not built on revenge or triumph, but on truth acknowledged and carried forward. As the day ended, Victoria stood quietly for a moment, watching Noah lift one of the children into his arms. The river no longer dominated her thoughts. It existed as a fact, not a force. She had not won anything. She had endured, and that she understood now was the most lasting form of justice.